My name is Aurora Lane. I'm 35 years old. Yesterday, my parents literally tried to ship me out of their lives for the price of a used car. They sat me down at this fancy rooftop restaurant in downtown Dallas, lifted a silver dome like it was some grand reveal, and instead of dessert, there was a one-way ticket to a tiny town called Cedar Falls and a check for $7,000 for a fresh start. My sister was filming the whole thing as brave parents saving their broken daughter. But what none of them knew was that, just days earlier, my failed AgTech startup had been quietly sold to a corporation for $10.5 million. Before I tell you how that blew up my family, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because you won't believe what happened next. I grew up in a quiet, manicured suburb outside Atlanta, the kind with identical brick houses and neighbors who compared SAT scores the way other people compared weather. From the outside, our family looked textbook perfect. Dad in finance, mom on charity boards, my sister Megan, the golden child with her tennis bag and glossy ponytail, and me, the girl who showed up to family brunch with grease on her fingers from taking apart a motor. When other kids were at sleepovers, I was soldering wires at the kitchen table, building clumsy little robots out of old printer parts. I still remember the night one of my bots finally managed to follow a black line I'd taped on the tile. It wobbled and squeaked its way from the fridge to the door, and I was so proud I called everyone in to see. Megan glanced up from a tennis magazine. Mom paused loading the dishwasher. Dad muted the game. The robot bumped into a chair leg and stalled. "That's cute," Mom said, already turning away. "Just don't burn the house down, okay?" Meanwhile, Megan could come home with a cheap gold-colored trophy from some local tennis tournament, and it would go straight to the center of the living room shelf, between Dad's framed degree and Mom's crystal vase. By high school, the pattern was set. Megan's matches got family caravans, matching chairs, and post-game dinners, even if she lost in the first round. While my science fairs got only Mom's text, "Good luck today, honey. Sorry we can't make it." Megan's got regionals. Getting into UC Berkeley for environmental engineering felt like slipping through a crack into a different universe. I still remember standing on campus for the first time, surrounded by people who actually knew what an Arduino was, hearing words like climate resilience and precision agriculture. At home, though, my acceptance letter was treated like a logistics problem. California. Dad frowned. "That's far. And expensive." But she got a scholarship, Megan reminded him, not out of pride for me, more like she wanted to keep the conversation moving. When I graduated from Berkeley with honors, I mailed the announcement home with a photo in cap and gown because they couldn't get away for the ceremony. Megan's law school schedule was busy, and apparently the flights were outrageous. I remember calling Mom afterward, standing on a crowded sidewalk in my wrinkled blue gown, diploma folder under my arm. "So I did it," I said, laughing, trying to sound light. "Top of my class in environmental engineering." "That's cute, honey," she answered. "You always did like your little science projects." Then she launched into an excited description of Megan's internship interviews and how Columbia Law was such a smart choice and so practical. When I got a research scholarship for my work on water use efficiency, I forwarded them the official email, the digital seal, and all. The reply came 3 hours later. "Proud of you," Mom wrote. "Every bit helps, right?" Then, in a separate message, "By the way, Megan made law review. We're throwing a little party on Saturday. You should see the cake design we ordered." They posted 37 photos from that party on Facebook. Megan in a white dress, Megan holding a gavel prop, Megan cutting into a fondant law book. The kitchen counters I'd once covered with circuit boards were now covered in cupcakes with scales of justice piped in frosting. When I scrolled through the album, I spotted myself in exactly one framed picture hanging behind them on the wall, 8th grade me holding a dinky robotics certificate, half cut off by a glare on the glass. That was my life as the less successful daughter, medals in drawers, reports in folders no one read, late-night lab sessions nobody asked about. FieldFlow was born in a cramped Berkeley lab that always smelled like burnt dust and overworked espresso machines. At first, it wasn't a startup or a product. It was just a stubborn homework assignment I refused to let die, an algorithm that adjusted irrigation based on real-time soil and weather data. On my laptop, the simulations looked beautiful. Colored graphs, smooth curves, tidy efficiency gains. In my head, I could see fields across the country quietly watering themselves while farmers slept. Then I took the first version to my research advisor, Professor Kincaid. He read in silence, red pen scraping across my draft like it was cutting into bone. When he finished, he tapped the stack of pages with the pen and said, without looking up, "The idea is good, but this is a science fair project, not a product." Science fair project. I smiled like it didn't hurt, thanked him, and walked out of his office with my ears burning. Inside, it felt like every time my mother had called my work cute, suddenly condensed into one sentence. So I did what I always did with pain. I turned it into obsession. That semester, I basically moved into the lab. I lived on campus coffee, stale muffins, and instant noodles. While other students went to concerts and hiking trips, I sat hunched over my laptop at midnight, rewriting modules and arguing with buggy sensor drivers. I dove into agronomy papers, weather modeling, soil physics. I learned just enough about everything to wire it into field flow. The more people dismissed it, the more I needed it to work. When a small agricultural innovation grant opened, I submitted my messy proposal with shaking hands. A month later, I got an email. I'd won $5,000 and access to a tiny shared workspace in the engineering basement. To anyone else, it was pocket change. But to me, it was like oxygen. I used the grant and almost all my savings to buy better sensors and to hire a tiny remote dev team in Utah, 2 night owl coders and 1 single mom who pushed code after putting her kids to bed. We met on glitchy video calls, screens full of tired faces, and shared repos. FieldFlow slowly grew from a fragile script into a real system, hardware in the dirt, valves that opened on command, dashboards that updated in real time. When we finally landed a pilot test on a cornfield in Nebraska, it felt like my whole life was riding on those rows of plants. I flew out there in borrowed boots and a thrift store jacket, trying to look like I belonged among men who'd been working the land longer than I'd been alive. The field stretched out in even green lines, and for a moment I let myself believe I was ready. At first, everything looked fine. The sensors pinged, the valves clicked on and off, the dashboard showed neat little graphs. I sent screenshots to my team with too many exclamation marks. Then, the corn leaves began to curl. Subtle at first. A twist at the edges. A dryness that didn't match the numbers on my screen. The moisture readings said the soil was fine. But the plants said otherwise. By the time we figured out what was wrong, the damage had started. A stupid logical error in the code had misinterpreted time windows when the temperature spiked. FieldFlow had been underwatering, just a little, just long enough to stress the crop. The yield forecast dropped. The farmer's jaw clenched. He didn't yell, which somehow felt worse. As I walked the rows, staring at the wilted leaves, I heard one of the workers behind me mutter to another, "The college girl almost burned the field." And nobody corrected him. Failure in Nebraska should have killed FieldFlow. Honestly, for a few days, it almost killed me instead. I flew back to California with dust still in my shoes and the farmer's tight jaw burned into my memory. My inbox was full of polite but firm messages about reassessing future collaboration. My dev chat was full of question marks and half-written apologies. What I really wanted to do was crawl into bed and stay there. What I actually did was borrow lab space from a PhD friend who owed me a favor. It was a windowless room in the back of an old engineering building, full of mismatched chairs and humming machines. At night, when everyone else went home, it became mine. I printed months of sensor logs and spread them across a long table. Moisture readings, valve events, temperature spikes, weather API calls, timestamps. So many timestamps. Something bothered me from the beginning. The numbers looked right, but the plants had been wrong. It felt like walking past a digital clock that says noon while the sky outside is pitch black. One night, around 2 a.m., my eyes kept getting dragged to a single column in the logs. Time. Not the values themselves, the format. Some entries had a Z at the end. UTC. Others didn't. I froze. Slowly, I traced through the code. Part of FieldFlow was using local time from the hardware. Another part, the section that calculated moisture windows during the hottest hours, was using UTC from the Weather API. It meant the system thought the peak heat was happening earlier than it actually did. We weren't watering when the plants needed it most. By the time the valves opened, the stress window had already passed. It wasn't a big, dramatic bug. It was subtle. Embarrassingly subtle. But in a field depending on precision, subtle was enough to starve thousands of plants. To be honest, I wanted to throw up. But instead, I opened a new file and started over. If time zones had slipped through, what else could? I stopped trying to patch the old code. I rewrote FieldFlow from scratch, line by line, like I was building a plane I knew I'd have to fly in a storm. This time, I built in self-correcting mechanisms. The system would compare expected soil moisture curves with actual readings and flag any drift. If sensors went weird, FieldFlow would fall back to conservative watering patterns instead of blindly trusting bad data. I added cross-checks between different data sources, sanity checks on time, and panic buttons that farmers could hit to override everything. It was slower, clunkier, but I trusted it. Another small grant opened, this one aimed at climate-resilient agriculture pilots. My Nebraska disaster almost scared me away from applying. Then I remembered the way that worker had said, the college girl almost burned the field. So I applied. And I got the grant. This time, we tested on a smaller plot with a farmer who was cautious, but curious. No huge promises. No big speeches. Just a section of land, some sensors, and my heart beating way too fast. Day by day, the graphs came in. The moisture levels stayed within the target bands, even when the weather swung harder than we expected. The self-correcting routines kicked in twice when a sensor glitched, adjusting on the fly instead of quietly failing. By mid-season, the numbers were clear. Water use had dropped far more than I'd predicted, and the plants looked happy. You can see it when you walk a field. Leaves relaxed, color deep, soil cool under the surface. Standing there, boot heels pressed into damp earth, I realized the system that had nearly wrecked a cornfield was now quietly saving water and protecting yield. When a regional AgTech exhibition in Denver announced it was accepting case studies, I knew exactly what story I wanted to tell. I didn't hide the failure. My presentation was literally titled, From Underwatering Disaster to Self-Correcting Irrigation, a FieldFlow case study. People actually stopped walking by. Engineers leaned in to take photos of my graphs. A couple of farmers asked blunt questions I respected more than any polite applause. One of them shook his head and said, "Takes guts to put your screw-ups on the first slide." Around mid-afternoon, a small group in matching badges approached my booth. Their tags all said the same company name, AgriNova. I knew the name. Everyone in AgTech did. They were the kind of major player whose booths took up entire corners of convention floors. One of their engineers grilled me for almost an hour. How did the self-correcting mechanism handle multiple failing sensors? What were my assumptions about evapotranspiration in extreme heat? I answered with shaking hands, but steady math. And a week later, I got an email. AgriNova wanted to schedule a formal technical call. That call felt like a thesis defense and a job interview rolled into one. Their team joined from 3 different time zones. We shared screens, scribbled on virtual whiteboards, argued about edge cases. Someone played devil's advocate so aggressively I started sweating through my shirt. But when it was over, one of the senior engineers smiled, just a little. "This isn't a science fair project," he said. "This is a platform." So, 2 days later, the offer came. AgriNova would acquire FieldFlow code, IP, pilot contracts for $10.5 million. On top of that, they wanted me in Seattle as their director of sustainable farming systems to lead integration and future research. I read the email 3 times, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into a cruel joke. But they didn't. The contract that followed was thick, full of clauses and contingencies. I hired a local lawyer to walk me through it line by line. We negotiated equity, vesting, non-compete periods. I watched numbers appear in drafts that would have made my father's head spin. When I finally signed, my hand trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of it all. The Nebraska failure. The midnight logs. The bug and second chance. My phone buzzed right after I scanned the signature page and sent it back. A text from my mom. Did you see Megan's firm made partner track? So proud of her. She works so hard. What are you up to these days with your little project? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I locked my phone, closed my laptop, and walked out into the Seattle drizzle. I didn't tell them anything. The night of the Dallas dinner felt like stepping into a stage play where everyone but me had rehearsed their lines. The rooftop restaurant was high enough that the city looked soft, like someone had smudged the skyline with their thumb. Strings of lights hung over the tables, and expensive wine glasses were already sweating in the heat. I arrived on time and still somehow felt late, like I'd missed the beginning of a meeting about my own life. Megan was the first face I saw. She was in a cream blazer and silk top, her hair pulled into this effortless-looking twist I knew had taken her half an hour. Her phone was already out, the little ring light clipped on, bathing her in soft white. There she is, she said, turning the camera toward me. The woman of the hour. I mumbled something like, hey, and slid into my seat. Dad David was in his usual dark suit, tie loosened just enough to suggest he was off duty, but not enough to actually relax. And Mother, Carol, wore a blue dress with subtle sparkles that caught every bit of light. They didn't ask about my flight, or my work, or why I'd agreed to this dinner so quickly. They asked if I'd thought more about coming back to something stable. I knew what they meant. Abandon the little project, get a normal job, stop embarrassing the family chat with my uncertainty. I watched them while they ordered. Megan carefully angled her phone to catch the waiter pouring wine. Mom adjusted her bracelet so it glittered as she lifted her glass. Dad checked the label, just enough time to let Megan film it. We made small talk over appetizers that looked like sculpture. Megan's firm. Mom's charity gala. Dad's golf game. Every topic carefully orbiting around the fact that I'd built something they didn't understand and hadn't bothered to ask about. And when the plates were cleared, everything shifted. The waiter appeared with a silver-domed tray, walking slowly, like he knew he was carrying a plot twist. He set it right in front of me. Megan's phone was already recording, pointed straight at my face. Dad cleared his throat and leaned back, slipping into his important talk voice. Aurora, he began, using my full name like this was an official proceeding, your mother, and I have been watching you struggle for a long time. I felt Megan zoom in. We see you trying things that don't quite work out, he continued. We see you stuck in this rut. And as your parents, it's painful. Truly painful. But love is not just about support. Sometimes it's about tough love. About doing what's best for you, even when you don't like it. Mom nodded on cue, her eyes already shining. He rested his hand on the dome. So we made a decision. With a little flourish, the waiter lifted the lid. No dessert. No cake. Just a white plate with two things on it. A one-way bus ticket to Cedar Falls, Iowa, and a crisp check. $7,000. For a second, all I could hear was the hum of the rooftop heaters and my own heartbeat. The check lay there like a joke with no punchline. Mom leaned in, voice soft and trembling. Honey, we found a place where you can really start over. A small town, slower pace, honest work. Dad talked to a man who owns a farm out there. He's willing to take you on. Room, board, structure. Megan's camera shifted, catching my hands, my face, the plate. Dad pointed at the check. This is to help you get on your feet. To get you out of the chaos you've created chasing your ideas. $7,000, no strings. A fresh start. He paused, clearly pleased with the phrase. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. We can't just sit by and watch you waste your potential anymore. We love you too much. I looked down at the ticket. Cedar Falls. A place they had chosen for me, like they were mailing back defective merchandise. My phone lay in my lap, screen face down, silent. But in my head, I saw a different number. The one on the contract I'd signed weeks earlier. The one the bank representative had repeated slowly, like they wanted to be sure I understood. $10.5 million. Already sitting in an account with my name on it. Approved. Cleared and real. I picked up the check carefully, held it between my fingers like it might crumble. Thank you, I said, keeping my voice steady. This means a lot. Megan zoomed in on my face, searching for tears, for gratitude, for some viral-worthy shot of a damaged daughter being saved. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her nails cool and perfect against my skin. We're doing this because we believe in you, she said. No, I thought. You're doing this because you don't. But I smiled, nodded, played my assigned role. In my lap, my phone buzzed. I glanced down. A new message lit the screen from a contact labeled only, Agrinova, VP Ops. They're waiting for you at the Seattle office on Monday. I looked up at my parents, still so sure they were rescuing me. Okay, I said softly. I'll go. The morning after the rooftop dinner, my mother arrived at my apartment 10 minutes early, like she was afraid I'd run away from the intervention she'd scripted. She didn't even say hello before she started scanning the room, taking in the mismatched furniture and secondhand dishes like they were evidence in a case against me. I'm glad you didn't pack without me, she said. You tend to overcomplicate things. On the bed sat an open suitcase with exactly what she expected to see: secondhand jeans, faded t-shirts, thick socks, 2 hoodies that looked practical, and a pair of old sneakers with the soles starting to peel. I'd pulled them from the back of my closet specifically for this. No blazers. No heels. Nothing that suggested I might be heading to a corporate office instead of a farm. Mom ran her hand over the clothes like she was blessing them. This is good, she murmured. You'll want things you don't mind getting dirty. Farm work is grounding. It will be good for you. I nodded, letting her believe she was the expert on a life she'd never lived. She peered into my tiny wardrobe next. You don't need any of these dresses, she decided. They'll just remind you of your distractions. Better to focus. I slipped my laptop into a plain backpack instead of my usual tote, along with a slim folder of documents. She didn't ask what was inside. In her mind, my little project was over. Why would I need anything more than work boots and obedience in Cedar Falls? We did a final walkthrough of the apartment. She pointed at a plant I'd been keeping alive on the windowsill. You should give that to someone, she said. You don't know what your housing will be like there. I already did, I lied. In reality, my landlord's nephew would pick it up after I left for the airport later. On the way down to the car, she carried my suitcase herself, like a symbolic burden. So I let her. It seemed important to her that she feel the weight of her own decision, even if she didn't understand what she was actually carrying. The drive to the bus station was a familiar mix of concern and criticism. You know, Aurora, a lot of people would be grateful for this chance, she said, eyes on the road. Not everyone gets a reset handed to them. Your father pulled strings for this farm job. I watched Dallas blur by outside the window, strip malls and glass towers and overpasses I knew by heart. I am grateful, I answered, and in a way, I wasn't lying. Their version of a reset had forced me to see how completely my life had outgrown their expectations. At the station, she insisted on walking me inside. The air smelled like coffee, exhaust, and old gum. Buses idled in a ragged line outside, each one a steel capsule full of stories that didn't belong to me. Let me see your ticket, she said, hand out. I showed her the printout for Dallas, Cedar Falls, the same one they'd placed so dramatically under the silver dome. She checked the time, the gate number, her mouth tightening with the satisfaction of someone who had double-checked the universe itself. You'll call when you arrive, she said. It wasn't a question. Of course, I replied without hesitation. At the gate, she pulled me into a hug that smelled like her expensive perfume. For a second, I let myself lean into it, just to remember what it felt like before their love became conditional. You're doing the right thing, she whispered. You'll see. This will straighten you out. I smiled into her shoulder instead of saying what I knew more than she. I handed my ticket to the driver, climbed the steps, and found a seat by the window. Mom stood on the sidewalk below, small and neat, holding her purse with both hands. Megan would have called it good content if she'd been there. When the bus pulled away, I raised my hand and waved, watching my mother shrink until she was just a dot in the glass. She waved back, then took out her phone, no doubt texting Megan. She's on the bus. It's done. I stayed on until the first major hub, a bigger station 2 hours away, where people shuffled off into fluorescent light and stale air. The moment the bus door hissed open, I grabbed my backpack and suitcase and stepped into my real life. In the bathroom, I changed from the worn hoodie into a black sweater and swapped the old sneakers for clean, practical boots. Nothing flashy, just competent. I tied my hair up, washed my face, and looked at myself in the scratched mirror. "You're not going to Iowa," I said quietly. Saying it out loud made it real. From the station, I called a rideshare to a different airport across town, the one with my already booked ticket to Seattle waiting in the app. While Mom probably refreshed the bus tracker, I went through TSA with my laptop and a signed employment contract in my bag. Somewhere between security and the gate, my phone pinged with a notification from Megan's Instagram. I opened it out of morbid curiosity. It was a slow pan across their quiet Dallas driveway at sunset. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to give the people you love space to figure themselves out." The comments were full of heart emojis and "You're such a good sister." I just turned my phone to airplane mode. Hours later, the plane descended through a cloud blanket into Seattle's gray. The air smelled wet the second the airport doors slid open, a chill that seeped pleasantly into my bones. A car from AgriNova was waiting for me, my name on a little sign, like I was someone important. We drove past water and cranes and low, industrial buildings, then turned into a quiet neighborhood near the bay. My new apartment was small but bright, with big windows looking out over Puget Sound and a stack of welcome documents on the counter. "Company housing," the driver explained. "At least for the first year." I wheeled my same battered suitcase into the bedroom, opened it, and smiled at the sight of all those Cedar Falls clothes. Old jeans, tired t-shirts, the sneakers I'd never wear to the office. One life in the suitcase. Another waiting on Monday. While Megan's followers imagined me shivering in an Iowa farmhouse, rethinking everything, I stood at the window of my company-paid apartment, watching the lights on the water and thinking, for the first time in my life, nobody here knew me as the disappointing daughter. An hour after I dragged my suitcase into the Seattle apartment, I was sitting on the floor between half-unpacked boxes, eating cold takeout straight from the container. My laptop was on the coffee table, half open. I only checked my email because I'm conditioned to. Years of grants and deadlines will do that to you. The subject line hit me first. "Story draft is live. Please review." It was from a reporter I'd spoken to during the AgTech exhibition in Denver. I clicked, expecting a dry little piece about innovative irrigation tucked away in some niche corner of the internet. Instead, I saw my own face. A photo I barely remembered posing for, standing in front of a field, hair in a messy bun, sun in my eyes, holding a tablet. And above it, in big, bold letters, "My parents called me their useless daughter until my AgTech startup sold for $10.5 million. For a second, my brain refused to process the words. It was my nickname. Just printed on a business site that looked suspiciously like Forbes. I scrolled, heart banging against my ribs. The article told the story of field flow of the Nebraska disaster of the rewrite. Somewhere in the middle, there was a paragraph about growing up as the less celebrated sibling and a quote from me I'd almost forgotten giving. "Some kids are told they're special." I was mostly told I was a problem to be fixed. And the number, $10.5 million, sat in black and white, right under my name. I should have been thinking about investors, or industry visibility, or how this might affect my role at AgriNova. But instead, I thought about my mother reading that headline over her morning coffee. Notifications started to hit my phone in waves. At first, it was email, colleagues from Berkeley forwarding the link. Then my old robotics coach from high school, proud emojis sprinkled between sentences. Then a group email from the Berkeley engineering department. They'd reposted the article on their official page with a caption about alumni impact in sustainable agriculture. On LinkedIn, things went insane. Connection requests. Messages from people whose titles I'd only ever seen on conference badges. Comments under AgriNova's brand new post. Welcoming Aurora Lane, Director of Sustainable Farming Systems. Fresh off a successful $10.5 million acquisition of her startup, FieldFlow, Aurora joins us to lead the next generation of smart irrigation. The photo they used was me in the lobby that morning, still in my travel-wrinkled blazer. People in the industry wrote things like, "I remember hearing about that Nebraska trial. What a comeback." A few minutes later, my cousin Sophia's name flashed on my screen. Not a call, she knew I hated those, just a screenshot and a line of text. Have you seen the family chat? My stomach tightened. I opened WhatsApp and scrolled to the Lane family group. The unread count looked like a slot machine. The link to the article sat there, pasted by an aunt who usually only posted prayer hands and birthday gifts. Under it, a flood of messages. Is this our Aurora? Wait, David, didn't you say she was having problems? Carol, didn't you just send her to some farm? I'm confused. Then, the one that made me snort out loud. You sent this daughter to Iowa? There were more screenshots, more question marks. A cousin I barely knew added a string of laughing emojis and wrote, "Plot twist of the year." For once, the chat wasn't orbiting around Megan's achievements. Her name didn't appear until several lines down, in a message from my aunt and Megan. Did you know about this? But there was silence from her. My parents hadn't said a word yet either. I could see they were online, those tiny typing. Ellipses kept popping up, then disappearing. Somewhere in Dallas, my mother was probably trying to figure out how to spin this into a story where she was still the wise, sacrificial parent. But the narrative had slipped out of her hands. I closed the family chat and walked back to the big window in the living room, the one overlooking the water. The sky was starting to clear, a strip of pale light opening over the gray. Behind me, on my laptop, the article refreshed with new shares, new comments, new versions of my name attached to words like innovator and founder. A couple of weeks into my new job at AgriNova, my days finally started to feel normal. Meetings about pilot programs, calls with agronomists, endless whiteboard sketches of future product roadmaps. People knocked on my office door to ask for my opinion. My signature actually meant something. But then, legal pinged me. I was in a conference room, halfway through a discussion about deploying field flow in vineyards, when my laptop screen lit with a new email notification from AgriNova Legal Contracts. Subject: Correspondence from external counsel, for your review. My stomach did that old familiar drop. For a split second, I thought maybe I'd messed up my IP transfer, that some clause in the acquisition was coming back to bite me. I opened the email as soon as the meeting ended. Attached was a PDF. The body text was short. Aurora. We received the attached letter from a law firm claiming to act on behalf of your parents. Please review and advise on any relevant background. My parents. Of course. I clicked the attachment. It was on heavy-looking letterhead from a mid-sized Dallas firm I recognized from Megan's bragging. The tone was painfully polite, the kind that smells faintly of gunpowder. They respectfully asserted that the $7,000 my parents had given me was an early-stage financial contribution toward my startup. They referred to it as an informal seed investment, made in reliance on my representations that I would use those funds to pursue entrepreneurial endeavors. They claimed that, given the subsequent sale of Field Flow for $10.5 million, my parents were entitled to a reasonable equity equivalent. Their suggested figure, 30%. 30% of $10.5 million? I actually laughed. Out loud. The letter went on, layering phrases like family financial support during the development phase, moral and equitable obligations, and informal investor status. It referenced the article, quoted my disappointment daughter line like it was evidence, and then, almost elegantly, slid into threat territory. We hope to resolve this matter amicably. However, absent a negotiated agreement, our clients reserve all rights to pursue their equitable interest in your venture. My parents had turned my whole life into a LinkedIn essay prompt. Speaking of which, my phone buzzed at that exact moment with a LinkedIn notification. New article by Megan Lane, Blood, Money, and Code, The Moral Obligations of Founders to Family Investors. My curiosity won. So I clicked. Megan's article was polished, full of references to case law and emerging ethical norms in startup culture. She described hypothetical scenarios of parents taking a leap of faith to support their children's risky ideas, only to be cut out when those ideas paid off. In Megan's version of the story, parents like ours weren't controlling or dismissive. They were early believers who had bravely written checks when everyone else doubted. My hands started shaking, not from fear, but from a very old, very familiar anger. Because here was the thing, when I was actually struggling, when I was pawning my weekends and my sleep and my social life to test field flow, my parents hadn't once called it an investment. They'd called it a phase, a distraction, a mistake. And now, after one dramatic dinner and a check under a silver dome, suddenly they were venture capitalists. I closed Megan's article and opened my banking app instead. I scrolled through my accounts until I reached the one I'd deposited the AgriNova money into. The balance still made me a little dizzy. I forced myself to breathe, to look past the big number, down to the smaller, almost forgotten line in the list of transactions. The $7,000 check. It sat there in the mobile deposit history, image attached. The status line said, pending, not yet credited. When they gave it to me in Dallas, I'd snapped a photo in the bathroom that night, more out of habit than anything. Some part of me had resisted actually cashing it, like accepting their fresh start fund would mean acknowledging their version of the story. So it had just sat there, unprocessed. I tapped the thumbnail of the check. It enlarged on my screen, crisp and high resolution. My name, their signature, the amount. And there, in my father's careful handwriting on the memo line, Fresh Start Fund. Not investment. Not seed round. Not equity stake. They hadn't invested in my startup. They'd tried to pay me to disappear. I took a screenshot of the enlarged check image, then another of the deposit details showing the memo line and status. Then I hit the button to finally process it into my account. If they wanted to call it an investment, fine. I'd officially accept their payment in full and define it on my terms. Next, I drafted an email to the firm. I copied in AgriNova's legal counsel, then added my parents' personal addresses at the top. If they wanted to play the professionalism game, I could play just fine. I kept the message short. Dear counsel, please note that the $7,000 referenced was tendered by your clients as a personal gift, described explicitly by them as a fresh start fund, not as an investment, loan, or contribution in exchange for equity. I have attached documentation reflecting this characterization, including the memo line of the check itself. As of today, that amount has been deposited and may be considered accepted in full accordance with its stated purpose. Your clients have no legal or equitable claim to any share of the field flow transaction or related IP. Please consider your client's payment received in full. Then I attached the screenshots from my banking app, along with a PDF scan of the check my lawyer had taken when we first reviewed my finances for the acquisition. My cursor hovered over send for a moment. I thought about that rooftop, about my mother's tremble on the words tough love, about my father's performance of sacrifice. So I hit send. A few minutes later, my lawyer responded, calm and concise, confirming that my reply was appropriate and sufficient, and that they'd take it from there. AgriNova's legal counsel thanked me for the context and assured me the company saw this as a personal matter with no bearing on our agreement. That was all I needed. And the next part was quieter. I opened my contacts app and scrolled down to Mom, then Dad, and Megan. I stared at each name for a long time. These were the people who had shaped almost every insecurity in my brain. They had turned my childhood into a case study and my success into a claim. My thumb hovered, then tapped, block this caller. Then again and again. Messages, FaceTime, WhatsApp. One by one, I cut the lines they used to pull me back into their narrative. Seattle settled into my bones slowly. After a few months, I could almost forget that I'd arrived here under an alias my family still believed in, while the real me was swiping a keycard into AgriNova's glass building, coffee in one hand, laptop in the other. My days filled up with fields I never walked in person, but knew by their data signatures. Dashboards glowed with moisture levels and pump cycles from orchards, vineyards, cornfields hundreds of miles away. If numbers could talk, they would have sounded like relief. Less wasted water, fewer stressed plants, yields holding steady through brutal heat. Director of Sustainable Farming Systems still felt weird in my mouth, but in the hallways, people treated it like it belonged to me. I sat in meetings where nobody called my work cute. Here, field flow wasn't a phase. It was a product line, a bet, a department. I started mentoring interns almost by accident. One afternoon, HR asked if I'd join a coffee chat with a new batch of engineering students. I showed up expecting small talk and instead found 3 kids with the same haunted look I used to see in the mirror. One of them, a quiet girl named Priya, lingered after everyone else left. She twisted her badge lanyard around her fingers and said, barely above a whisper, "My parents keep asking when I'm going to get a real job." You know, not computer stuff. Something they can explain to their friends. I knew that ache too well, the sting of having to translate your life into something other people understood. I smiled at her. You know what I tell my team? I said, trust your data, not their fear. She blinked, then laughed once, shaky but real. Later that week, she emailed me a screenshot of her desktop wallpaper, the same sentence in bold letters across a photo of a field at dawn. Little by little, my office changed. When I'd first moved in, the shelves were empty. No framed diplomas from proud parents, no childhood photos. Just bare wood and a lonely desk plant HR had stuck there as a gesture. By December, those shelves held a different kind of history. A glass plaque from an AgTech conference for Innovation in Water Stewardship. A framed photo of my Denver presentation, me pointing at a slide full of error bars while 3 farmers in the front row leaned forward. A silly 3D printed trophy the interns had made with the words Bug Slayer badly embossed around the base. There were photos, too. Not of family vacations or my sister's trophies, but of people who actually knew what I did. My dev team from Utah all on one grainy Zoom screenshot, laughing at something off camera. My Nebraska farmer, standing in front of his second pilot plot. This time with a quiet, satisfied smile, a group selfie from the day we signed the paperwork for a scholarship fund with Berkeley. The scholarship had been my idea. I emailed my old department chair and pitched it half expecting them to ignore me. Instead, they replied within an hour with caps lock and too many exclamation marks. Together, we built the outline for a fund specifically for students who'd been underestimated, late bloomers, kids whose families didn't understand why they were wasting time on research instead of getting a real job. We called it the Believed in Late Scholarship. The name made me want to cry and laugh at the same time. The first time I saw it listed on Berkeley's site with my name attached, I felt something stitch itself back together inside me. I hadn't just outrun my old story. I'd started rewriting it for someone else. Christmas Eve came quicker than I expected. Seattle did its usual thing, cold drizzle, early darkness, lights smudged by mist. Back in Atlanta, my parents were probably arranging a perfectly curated tree and pretending the family group chat wasn't still recovering from the bomb that article had dropped. In my apartment, I pushed my dining table against the window and covered it with mismatched plates and takeout containers. Thai, Ethiopian, pizza, some questionable sushi someone swore was totally fine. A couple of cheap bottles of red wine sweated beside a chipped ceramic bowl full of grocery store cookies. And my chosen family trickled in one by one. First came the interns, arms full of food and nervous energy, their eyes widening at the view over Puget Sound. Then my 2 favorite stubborn founders from a neighboring startup, both of whom had turned down perfectly safe jobs against their parents' wishes. They walked in arguing about soil telemetry and immediately started rearranging chairs. And then, to my surprise, Professor Kincaid. He looked smaller without the fortress of his office around him, but his eyes were exactly the same, sharp, curious, and a little tired. He handed me a bottle of decent wine and said, with a slightly awkward smile, "For the record, I stand by calling it a science fair project. You just did the part one was hoping you'd do. Prove me wrong." "Consider yourself officially proven," I said, and we both laughed. We ate sitting wherever we could on chairs, on the floor, on the kitchen counter. The conversation bounced from failed prototypes to horrible investor pitches to the weirdest bugs anyone had ever found at 3 a.m. Someone put on a playlist that shifted between Christmas songs and lo-fi beats. At some point, my phone buzzed where it lay face down on the counter. The screen lit up, showing a voicemail notification from an unknown number with a familiar area code. When everyone had left and the apartment was a battlefield of empty containers and wine glasses, I finally tapped the message. My mother's voice filled the quiet kitchen, threaded with tears. Aurora, it's Mother. I miss you. The house is so quiet without you. Your father, well, he won't say it, but he misses you too. This has gone too far. Call us back. Please. We just want our family back. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the ache wash over me. There was still a part of me that wanted to believe that "we miss you" meant they finally saw me, not just what I could do for their image. Then my gaze slid up to the hallway just beyond the kitchen. From where I stood at the sink, I could see the bathroom light I'd left on. And in the mirror above the sink in there, faint but visible, was the reflection of that framed check. $7,000. With a memo, Fresh Start Fund. So I turned off the voicemail and let the silence return. I rolled up my sleeves and started washing dishes, the warm water numbing my fingers, the leftover curry smell clinging to the air. Behind me, faint laughter still echoed in the walls from the people who'd filled this apartment tonight. People who knew my work, trusted my judgment, didn't need me to perform failure or redemption on command. This was the return on their real investment, my team, my students, the farmers whose fields we were helping. The kids who would get that scholarship and think, maybe I'm not a lost cause after all. I glanced one more time at the check in the mirror and thought, not with bitterness, but with a strange, quiet gratitude, you really did invest in me. You just didn't understand that my freedom would be the return on your investment. If you've ever been the disappointing one in your family, the one nobody believed in until it was convenient, please tell your own story in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because there are still many thrilling family revenge stories ahead.